Hi, Stephen Capra, Bull Visions Conservation, with a very special guest today, Senator Jeff Steinborn of New Mexico, who recently pushed through a bill with some other senators to reform the Game and Fish Commission, something we desperately need to do in Montana. And I'll just, for transparency's sake, say that Jeff and I worked in the past on the creation of the Oregon Mountain Desert Peaks National Monument. So, Jeff, it's great to see you. This is one of the greatest organizers you'll ever meet,
Mhm.
and he's an incredible senator moving an environmental agenda in New Mexico. So, welcome, Jeff.
Great to be with you, Steve. Thanks.
Yeah.
And just for a little clarification, so I spent 5 years working at Craft, what ultimately became about half of our wildlife reform law. There are other provisions that other people have been fighting for, which we'll talk about, and they ultimately, cut the master deal that passed the bill. But I was the one who got it all started and shepherded the process that built about half the bill.
So, as we know in New Mexico, we have a game commission that just plays footsie with the governor. And in New Mexico, several years ago, we ended trapping, which was a big, bold move, something way overdue in Montana. So, Jeff, just give us the genesis of this bill, if you will, where it came from, and
Yeah.
why in New Mexico we needed to see this.
Well, in New Mexico, even though we're a state that's in the top five most biologically diverse states in the country for plant and wildlife and bird species, and we still manage it like it's basically the Old West. I always joke that our game laws sound like they were written by Davy Crockett. You know, they're written about trappers and wasting no fur, and it's all basically was written towards managing it for economic purposes and hunting and yes, trapping. We didn't ban trapping in the state, but we banned trapping on public lands in New Mexico,
Right.
which was a huge deal.
Yeah.
So that was the genesis of it, and we had a game commission. We have a game commission that, like a lot of them, were basically forgive for any good game commissioners that happen to have been appointed, but basically historically a bunch of good old boys who are political allies of the governor, and they were plumb political appointments of people who really didn't know anything about wildlife management. And so they were a disaster in New Mexico. The way the department was managed was a disaster. During the Martinez administration, they were objectively anti endangered species and were at the forefront of trying to pull us out of the wolf recovery program. And so, and the root of the problem is that in our wildlife laws, there was no real science. There's no real infrastructure there to put us on a path of actual science-based professional wildlife management. And so
And
that
livestock interests may have a big say in this too.
Oh, they have a huge say. They there's a program here where they get to sell, permits to bring people onto their land, and the game commission gives those out. And so yeah, really it was for, the whole thing though was geared towards hunters primarily. And that's what the system was really set up to do. And in fact, that's what the agency used to call their customers. They didn't call New Mexicans their customers or just people who cared about just wildlife. It was basically hunters and fishermen because the agency was largely funded through hunting fees. So anyway, so it was a desire to really modernize this thing for people like me who care really about conservation, who care about the environment. And, I think any use of wildlife, be it hunting, recreation, is a subset of that, but at its core, it should be a wildlife and a science managed agency. So this was built out of years of efforts of trying to figure out how best to reform this department. And different people have different beliefs, I should say, about where real reform is going to occur. Some people believe that it should happen in rooting science in the law. That's me. And then some people have believed that the whole crux of it was reforming our game commission, that if we could only pick better people at the top, then that would trickle down into to good policy making. But
Now in Montana, we have
yeah,
a Republican Party that is hell-bent on slaughtering wolves. So for you to go reach across the aisle,
yeah,
there had to be some compromises, I imagine. But we'll get into that down the
yeah,
road. Keep going. Keep telling us your story.
yeah. So ultimately, it was really interesting. I mean, I started introducing a bill, gosh, maybe over 5 years ago, and to update the mission of the department to make it more of a holistic, we're protecting wildlife for wildlife's sake and putting science and modernizing in the law itself. There's a management prescription that says decisions are supposed to be based on, and the law used to say for economic purposes.
Oh,
We have modernized it we've created kind of you know, um, an idealistic mission statement now saying that wildlife has intrinsic value, but yes, it ended up being a compromise that also talks about food supply and other things that are important to other constituencies. Um, so yeah, and the bill does a number of other things. I mean, it updates the mission. There was a lot of rope a dope for years with the agency, still is. I mean, these we're still dealing with Martinez era anti-conservation leadership of that department that this governor
boy.
inexplicably has never replaced. Um, when that would go a long way by itself, choosing a real science-based visionary to lead that department. But nonetheless, but they always said, well, we don't have the authority to protect more wildlife because of an old Supreme Court decision. So this law explicitly says the department has authority to manage any wildlife. We also added invertebrates to the definition of wildlife, which were not included before. So that's really meaningful. Those were really meaningful changes. We also changed the name of the department to the Wildlife Department. We changed the name of the commission to the Wildlife Commission. Now, currently, it is the Game and Fish Department, and it is the Game and Fish Commission. So, um, I think those name changes can be great, if it has the substance underneath it. Finally, we did update the Game Commission to number one, create a nominating commission, which I think is really a powerful idea that actually you would have a broad-based commission that would actually recommend qualified candidates to sit on a commission that the governor would then choose from that list, as opposed to his or her Rolodex of political donors and various yahoos. But so now there's a commission. Now it also is segmented, and we've created specific positions on that commission. And only two, unfortunately, out of seven are real science-based, I would argue conservation or designed to look like conservation titles, one being a scientist, the other being belonging to a person belonging to an organization that works on non-game species. The other five are at-large members. They're a sportsman, a rancher. Um, so, you know, unfortunately, to me, that composition indicates that we're not necessarily going to see any real policy wisdom or expertise coming out of a commission in and of itself. But at least it's a step forward because of the nominating commission. The drawback in what we did that I was opposed to is we made them 6-year terms from 4-year terms,
Ooh.
meaning that whoever we pick, we're stuck with for quite a while and probably into future governorships. So we get some real bad stinkers. A new governor is kind of stuck with them a little bit. Now, ultimately, there were some additional items that the governor vetoed in the bill, saying a commissioner could only be removed with cause determined by a court. And the governor vetoed that language because I think governors want the prerogative of being able to appoint who they want. So,
How
but
about
anyway,
how about the funding stream? Was
yeah.
there any change in the funding stream?
Well, what we did was we increased fees. So that was what the department really has wanted. So we changed it only because we updated the fees for the department for hunting licenses and whatnot, which are rooted in law in New Mexico. They're established in law, although we now I think said that they could increase according to consumer price index, so they can go up over time. But that is how the department's funded now, by increasing those fees, which were low. I think according to them, they now have sufficient funding to be able to do what they want. We've also given them specific appropriations um, to be able to, augment what they're doing and hire more scientists and whatnot. So,
So this is what it sounds like to me is this is good first step.
yeah.
After 5 years of contention, is there one thing in that bill you would really like to see put back in and you
Yeah.
would go after in the future?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it is an amazing first step um, in a lot of respects. But yeah, that the one real disappointment that I think we need to do in any state that wants to really take wildlife out of the political realm and put it more into the professional environmental management realm is put science into the law and make science the bedrock of how management decisions are made. And in this bill, as I mentioned, the law used to say management decisions would be made for economic reasons. We updated that to say it shall be made based upon a variety of factors that including habitat, climate change. And that word shall be made according to this was changed to may be made according to this.
Uh,
So it made it like arbitrary and flexible, like possible suggestions. So we need to change that may back to shall back to a may. Pardon me. We change may back to a shall so that we're putting science at the bedrock of these management decisions. So
and does Mexico, like Montana, insist that there's a rancher on the commission?
yes,
Yeah, is this been a part of the problem up in Montana? Now, you were in a Democratic run state.
right,
You were able to get this done. I'm thinking of the Democrats in Montana and the fact that a lot of their bills never get out of the off the table because they're tabled by Republicans. If you had any wisdom, what would you share to Montana representatives, Democrats who want to change this commission?
well, I would look at Senate Bill 5. I would look at what we did in New Mexico. That's Senate Bill 5 from the 2025 legislative session. You could go to nmlegis.gov, which is the legislature's website in New Mexico, nmlegis, legis.gov. Go to legislation, pull up Senate Bill 5 from the 2025 session. Read the bill, read the final version of the bill, and see the way the commission, it's actually it's actually was designed to cater to the smorgasbord of constituencies, including ag people, hunters, and a little, bone to the environmental community too, without giving us without giving a majority, God forbid. So it, look at that as a model, but creating a nominating committee at least moves the ball forward a little bit so that you can have some sort of vetting process to making sure that, you know,
Well, it's like
the best of available options might be recommended to a governor.
Well, we have a governor in Montana who's a trapper, and he appoints people that are only going to support trapping, with one exception.
Yeah,
We have a good person representing the Bozeman area who has been a standout in asking for science and trying to use science. But her concerns have been outweighed by the others who just rubber
right,
stamp the agenda. Plus,
right.
we have Republicans who are absolutely wanting to slaughter wolves. Did you encounter any of that in this process in New Mexico?
Oh, well, absolutely. And that sadly, I would say that's still the status quo, really, to an extent. I mean, our because our law itself is so weak on management guidance, it basically doesn't really have any teeth. Um, it still kind of has a little more teeth because it gives more authority to them that they can't hide behind, oh, we don't have the authority. when they do, and now the law explicitly says they do. It also, our law also now has an annual reporting requirement that they on their website have to report on their recovery efforts on species of greatest conservation need. That's a big deal, and that was something that I, worked to put in years past of developing this because there's no transparency, which is something that I'm sure a lot of states fight with. It's like, what are you guys actually doing? And they will say, well, we're doing a lot, and they move money around, they move positions around, and you don't really know, even when you give them more money, are they actually spending more money on conservation? So we put in at least a reporting requirement that annually, now species of greatest conservation need, all states have to do a state wildlife action plan in order to get federal funds. And they have to list their threatened species, their species of greatest conservation need, or what they call in shorthand SGCN. And in New Mexico, we do an action plan, but those species, that was not defined in law. So this bill, actually, this law in New Mexico also now defines species of greatest conservation need and requires the state to annually report what their recovery efforts are on those species because they are by definition threatened species, vulnerable species. So that's a good step forward in New Mexico.
That's a big step forward, I think. And
Yeah.
do you know, is there a funding stream for non-game species in New Mexico? I don't know if you know the answer to that.
Well, the answer is essentially, well, they would say yes. They would say yes because they would say that they are already using the money that they get from hunting and fishing licenses for non-game species. We also just did something actually visionary in a separate effort because New Mexico, fortunately, like some other Western states, are awash in oil and gas money right now. Um, we set up a big trust fund to create permanent recurring funding every year that would go towards a number of environmental type of funds and programs. One of them was the Game and Fish Department. And this was another battle I waged, was over the exact language of how those funds were to be used by them. But
Right.
nonetheless, they made a commitment, even though the language, part of that money, they get several million a year, goes to the Game and Fish Department, and they made a public commitment that they would only use that money for SGCN, that they would only use it for species of conservation needs, even though the language is broader than that. So that's cool. So we created some dedicated funding. The legislature has also given them one-time appropriations to help jumpstart this whole process, and they've got more money coming in through hunting and fishing licenses, which they have, in fact, hired a slew of new biologists. So, but now the transparency part comes in that, okay, are they just, how many of those positions are they just replacing other funds with these funds, but have they actually increased the conservation mission? And that's where it's a little bit of a sieve. And I think, any legislator looking at this issue in their state, even things dealing with just data reporting, tell us annually what species you're working on so you can actually track this to see if you're making progress. That's helpful, and I think we kind of moved the ball forward a little bit on that in our efforts as well. But they always maintained that they needed more money, and now they have more money in New Mexico.
Do you think there's an appetite to keep moving in this direction in future legislative sessions, or do you feel like everybody wants a respite after this?
Now, I think there is an appetite to keep moving forward, but that appetite looks like different things to different people. For me, my appetite is to put science. It's to change that may back into a shall. I believe that at the end of the day, this should not be about a bunch of political appointees, who know nothing about wildlife,
Right.
deciding how we're going to manage predators or how we're going to manage anything. It should be about real professional public servants with science backgrounds with a law that directs them to consider a range of environmental factors. And then the public also legally, oh no, yeah, they're afraid of that, but legally says, hey, wait a minute, you're not supposed to manage this in an arbitrary way or for an economic way. You're supposed to manage this for science. How else can we protect the environment? How else do we protect the environment in every other area outside of real scientific data mark bench points? We don't we could have had that in this bill, and they weakened it to get their bipartisan deal. I don't think they had to, but ultimately, that's what they chose to do. Those that were shepherding this bill. So for me, that's I think going to be the most powerful.
Unfinished business.
Yeah, but for them, that language that the governor vetoed, requiring that a commissioner could only be removed through cause. The people that really fought to reform the Game Commission, thinking that that's the holy grail of reform, they're going to fight for that. There's others who want to require that more hunting and fishing licenses go to just New Mexicans because we have what's called a non-resident set aside, which is, a stick in the eye to a lot of resident sportsmen. They don't feel like they're ever drawing the prize tags, but yet, we're
Oh,
courting.
that's the same in Montana.
Yeah,
But we're going to have a new governor next year,
yeah,
and that could change the dynamics. Although, there's a lot of people who have frustrations from her time at the Interior that she did not move more on the wolf protection.
yeah.
My take on that always was there's politics involved in decisions like that, and maybe now she has a chance at reforming that outcome and really helping Mexican wolves in this state. Uh,
Yeah. So
that
I,
would,
I would suggest, this might surprise people to hear me say this, but one thing you learn over years serving in the legislature is sometimes the way you get things done is you bite off chunks of it. As much as we can see a whole field of reform that's needed, and everything I just said to you still just scratches the surface of what we need to reform in New Mexico wildlife law. We still have rattlesnake roundup written into our law.
oh
We
boy.
still have fur bearing statutes that deal with trapping and fur. I mean, a lot of things that need to be updated. But, if you pick and choose a few issues that move the ball forward, and I think you will find, as we found, there's bipartisan frustration with these departments that maybe you can give and take on a few things, and then maybe people on maybe a more conservative side of the spectrum can give and take and agree to more data, agree to a little more science, agree to a more impartial, quality, broad-based nominating process for commissioners. Because that pendulum, they're just as terrified as a liberal governor taking office and swinging that pendulum all the way to the other side. So I think you can find some consensus maybe on a few issues and try to do that because they're really tough bills to pass, as we know. It stokes a lot of emotion and a lot of extremism, frankly, on people who just always fight anything conservation. It's just
Yeah.
tough. Yeah.
Well, this is sage advice for Montana legislators who have had a hard time even taking one piece of this and moving it
Right.
forward. Uh, Excuse me, Jeff. Tell me, so I'm going to switch subjects for a moment
Yeah.
because you've done a good job of explaining this bill, and I'm sure people will say to me, "Well, that's because you have a liberal state. You're able to do that." But I think you just touched on maybe it's not the whole piece, but little pieces for legislators to start working on back in Montana. We're dealing with two legislators who have a lawsuit demanding over 500 wolves be killed in Montana. They
Yeah.
didn't just legislate it, they are suing actively to make it happen. So, it's 1870 in Montana, and we're paying $1,000 to trappers and hunters to kill wolves at the very time we need wolves in the state.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's where, of course, we need, the federal government to have a strong backbone with regards to ecosystems and science. But yeah, it's tough. Under our previous governor, the first thing they did. Now, this was the governor right before this one. Now, granted, this one's been in office 8 years, but the previous one, Susana Martinez, the first thing her game commission did was they tried to pull us out of the Mexican gray wolf recovery program. They did, in fact, say that the state of New Mexico game department would no longer be a party to the wolf recovery effort.
And
And
Jeff, I was in New Mexico at that time, and what I remember vividly is going to meetings and the whole audience
yeah,
screaming shame, shame, shame at the commission. And
Yeah.
they shut them down on some occasions because people were really angry at what was happening.
Yeah. But even to this day, I mean, the reality is they could still do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's where I think, we need to put more science into the law and take it out of the realm of politics. So that would be, I think, my ultimate goal is to treat this like a real science environmental agency and not like a political good old boy structure from, the
Yeah,
The Crockett and Boone era.
exactly. I'm going to switch subjects now, and Jeff and I have some history. And when we started working on the Oregon Mountain Desert Peaks, there was a certain congressman from southern New Mexico, and you can say his name because I'm drawing a blank at the moment.
Steve Pierce.
Steve Pierce, exactly. Steve Pierce was an oil man that became our congressman in the Southern District. And he used to scream bloody murder at me about the monument proposal. And he said, over my dead body, you will ever get this monument. And I can remember being thrown out of his office. I can remember being in shouting matches with him. Um, and now President Trump has just nominated him to be the head of BLM. And maybe a few words from you on your experience with the congressman.
Yeah,
Is
I've been close to being thrown out of his office as well. Uh, but he and I have definitely gone the rounds and been in each other's face at town halls. And he is truly one of the most committed anti-conservation members of Congress in the last 20 years in America. And when he was in Congress, and he was in Congress for about 10 years or so, roughly, he introduced bills to weaken endangered species. He tried to introduce a bill basically, you know, um, basically putting cattle grazing at the top of the priority list of how public land should be managed, aside from oil and gas extraction. Uh,
it's
Basically eliminating wilderness. He believed in a doctrine that he told me to my face. He believed in what they called the Pombo Doctrine. There was a congressman who was like the ringleader of the anti-land conservation movement who believed that we should be removing from protection an acre of wilderness and protected land for every acre we protected. And Steve Pierce, literally, when we sat in his office in Washington, said he flew in a plane. This is the man who's now been nominated by President Trump to be, this is today's news, to be the new head of our Bureau of Land Management of 300 million acres of public land around this country. Told me to my face that he flew in a plane picking mountain ranges that he thought should be removed from protection. Um,
just
Somebody who actually never used the word environment without using the word extreme in front of it.
always. And
So
he was at his fancy about logging too.
and when Donald Trump came in office first time in 27, he did a review of our monuments. He was the head of a group in Congress called the Western Caucus, which literally sent a letter to the president recommending reductions in, I believe, 32 national monuments, including reducing the monument in his own congressional district by 90% that you and I, Steve, worked a decade to create. And one of the greatest days of our lives when President Obama in 2014 created what has become the largest national monument in New Mexico that you and I fought in the trenches for 10 years to create, the Oregon Mountain Desert Peaks National Monument, which is an amazing collection of skyline mountains and diverse ecosystems in southern New Mexico. And
And how's the community rallied around the monument?
well, let me give you some statistics. It was always popular. And, but literally, Steve, I don't know that you know the statistic, but it's going to blow your mind. We have had a tripling of visitation to this monument since it was protected in 2014. In 2014, we'd had just less than 200,000 visitors a year. We have had in the last estimate over 600,000 visitors a year. And
Wow.
these are according to BLM's own data that they keep at trailheads and visitor logs. It's incredible. You go up there and you see license plates from all over the country and people RVing, and it's just, you know,
And you
As,
go to a bar and they have a drink named after the Oregon
ex-
Mountains. It's
ex-
just, it's something.
exactly. We had an apparel company for Morgan Mountain Outfitters. We have bottles, vineyards that have, like you said, named drinks and bottles of wine. And so it's just it's incredible, and it's been just so positive for the community. The community loves its mountains, loves its public lands, and it's truly bipartisan. And
Uh,
unfortunately, these right-wing extremists just don't get that.
no, they
Sad.
don't. Well, Jeff, I wish you were in Montana. I tell you that. We could use you up there in a big way. And Jeff has been a fighter all this time, and he's a good friend of mine, somebody I respect with everything. The work he's doing in New Mexico is unbelievable. And I want to thank you for taking some time today and speaking with us. And I hope you can come away with two thoughts. We need to reform Montana's Game and Fish Commission, and we need to stop Steve Pierce from ever setting foot in a BLM office.
Yes,
And
absolutely. Public lands are our American identity. They are bipartisan. They are nonpartisan. So this is not a this is not a partisan issue, and I know that you people who live in the states you're working in, Montana, we all love our public lands. We love what we do on public lands. It's vital to frontier communities. And anyone that would seek to undermine that is a threat to our states and our state's economy and our communities and our way of life. So let's all unite in protecting the things. And as we did in New Mexico, ultimately we found that common ground. Let's move beyond partisanship, and I wish you luck. And Steve, thank you for all you do. You have been a tireless champion for the environment since I know you, and an inspiration, and admire what you're trying to do. And I hope people support that work, and because it just makes things better, like it's done here in Las Cruces. Who would not want that for their community?
exactly,
And by the way, we have not had a single reduction in the amount of livestock grazers or the amount of cattle that are on those lands in 10 years since we've had this monument. So it's only good things. It is the ultimate win-win solution. So let's all work together. And if open invitation, if I can ever be of assistance to anyone listening to this video or to a legislator, feel free to reach out. I'm also listed at nmlegis.gov. Again, you could go back and read Senate Bill 5. And yeah, let's keep moving this ball forward because we're all fighting these same battles. And I think that folks can learn from us a little bit.
bravo, my friend. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
We'll be in touch.
Good to spend time with you, Steve.
You too. Bye bye.